They called it the Golden Age, an era of beauty, glamour, and legends carved into celluloid. But beneath the lights that bathed Hollywood in gold, there was blood on the stage floor. Every dream had a cost. Every smile hid a bruise. The studios built gods, men and women sculpted by power, painted with perfection, packaged for worship. But gods are never born, they are created, and creation always requires sacrifice. Behind every screen idol stood the same machine, a network of handlers, fixers, and executives who decided who would rise and who would vanish. A misplaced rumor, a wrong romance, a single act of rebellion, and careers disappeared overnight. In a town where everyone was pretending, the truth became the most dangerous thing of all. Burt Lancaster once wrote, "Fame is the one disease you beg for, and the only cure is death." He wasn't exaggerating. The stars of that era burned hotter and faster than any before them. They weren't actors anymore, they were sacrifices to a hungry world that demanded to be entertained. Some sold their souls for power, some gave their bodies for fame, and some, the unlucky ones, gave everything. This is not the story of success. It's the story of obsession, of men and women who would do anything to be remembered. Hollywood remembers the winners, but history remembers the price. James Dean. The rebel, the drifter, the restless child who could never sit still long enough to be ordinary. He came to Hollywood not chasing money or fame, he came chasing motion. He once said, "If a man can bridge the gap between life and death, if he can live after he's dead, maybe he was a great man." Dean wasn't interested in living forever. He was interested in dying fast enough to be remembered. He grew up quiet, lonely, with a mother who adored him and a father who couldn't understand him. When she died, something in him broke not loudly, but completely. He carried that crack in his heart into every role he ever played. To the cameras, it looked like genius, and to those who knew him, it looked like a countdown. The studios saw his beauty, his danger, his sadness, and they sold it. They dressed it in leather, framed it in smoke, and called it Rebel Without a Cause. But James Dean wasn't acting. He was the rebellion, the living embodiment of everything Hollywood wanted to tame but couldn't. Burt Lancaster once described him as a fuse disguised as a boy. He lived like a storm in a bottle, shaking until the glass finally shattered. Fame came instantly too instantly. Dean didn't know how to handle worship. He didn't even believe it was real. He hated publicity, avoided parties, and spent nights racing cars through the desert like a man trying to outrun himself. He believed speed was truth, that at 100 miles an hour, you could finally feel something real. He said to a friend, "The closer you get to death, the more alive you feel." And so he kept driving faster. When Giant wrapped filming in 1955, he bought the Porsche 550 Spider, the little bastard. It gleamed silver, small, lethal, his mirror on wheels. Mechanics warned him it was cursed. Friends begged him not to drive it. He laughed and said, "You can't cage freedom." On September 30th, 1955, the desert highway stretched ahead of him like an open wound. At 5:45 p.m., a Ford turned across the road. Metal met metal. The impact twisted steel like paper. By the time help arrived, James Dean was unrecognizable. He was 24. News flashed across the world. Hollywood rebel dies in crash. Fans wept. Studios mourned. And yet, somewhere deep inside the industry, there was a whisper that James Dean had finally found the immortality he was chasing. Lancaster wrote in his notebook, "Dean didn't die because he wanted to. He died because he didn't know how to stop." In the years that followed, his face became legend. Posters, billboards, paintings his eyes forever young, forever lost. But the truth was simpler, crueler. James Dean never escaped Hollywood. He just turned it into a racetrack and crossed the finish line first. He lived like a spark in gasoline, and Hollywood has been trying to recreate that fire ever since. Marlon Brando. To millions, he was the definition of acting itself, the man who brought truth to the screen when everyone else was pretending. He changed everything, the way people spoke, moved, even breathed on camera. He was power without effort. Rebellion without permission, a god in human skin. But gods are never happy. Burt Lancaster once described him as a volcano pretending to sleep. He was unpredictable, magnetic, impossible to control both on screen and off. Directors feared him. Co-stars worshipped him. And women, they loved him the way a flame loves oxygen, not realizing that the closer they got, the faster they burned. Brando's genius was not in his acting, it was in his emptiness. He once said, "Acting is lying for a living." But he wasn't lying, he was confessing. Every performance was another piece of his own loneliness disguised as character. He didn't play roles, he escaped into them. Hollywood crowned him the new messiah. But behind the crown was chaos. Brando despised the very system that made him a legend. He mocked his directors, sabotaged his scenes, and refused to play the obedient movie star. He demanded truth in a place built on lies, and it drove him mad. He would arrive late, sometimes hours late, just to remind everyone that the film couldn't exist without him. He rewrote lines, changed blocking, ignored direction. For Brando, the set was a battlefield and art was war. Lancaster wrote, "He wasn't trying to act, he was trying to feel something, anything, because when the cameras stopped, he couldn't feel at all." There was a sadness in Brando's genius, a wound that fame couldn't heal. His childhood had been a storm of neglect and confusion. A mother lost to drink, a father lost to anger. So when the world started to love him, he didn't trust it. He couldn't. He turned affection into disgust, admiration into contempt. He sabotaged every relationship that got too close, lovers, friends, even his own children. He once told an interviewer, "The only reason I act is because I'm broken. The day I'm fixed, I'll stop." But he was never fixed, and he never stopped. In the 1970s, The Godfather made him immortal. It was his masterpiece, the performance of a lifetime. But Lancaster wrote that after the premiere, Brando sat in silence, staring at the screen, and whispered, "It's not me. It's never been me." He had become what he feared most, another myth, another mask, another lie. As years passed, Brando retreated from the world. He grew heavier, quieter, almost ghost-like. He lived on an island surrounded by empty land and old regrets. Reporters called him eccentric. Friends called him tragic. But Lancaster had another word for him: lost. In one of his final diary notes, Lancaster wrote, "Brando taught the world to feel and forgot how to feel himself. He changed acting forever, but it was never enough. He didn't want to be loved. He wanted to be understood, and no one ever was." When Marlon Brando died in 2004, the world mourned a legend. But Hollywood mourned something else, the last man who dared to tell the truth in a city built on lies. Al Mineo, the boy who lived in the shadow of James Dean and died in the shadow of Hollywood. He was only 16 when the cameras first caught him, dark-eyed, intense, too fragile for the world he was about to enter. In Rebel Without a Cause, he played Plato, the lonely, broken youth who followed Dean's rebel like a lost soul looking for a father. Off-screen, that wasn't acting. It was prophecy. After Dean's death, Sal became his reflection, the echo of a legend that Hollywood no longer needed. He was talented, sensitive, and different. But in the 1950s, being different could destroy you. Hollywood didn't know what to do with Sal Mineo. He wasn't the classic leading man, too honest, too emotional, too vulnerable. He wanted to tell stories that mattered, play characters that felt real. The studio system wanted something easier: charm, smiles, and obedience. Sal refused to fake any of it. As the years passed, the work disappeared. He tried theatre, he tried music. He tried to stay visible in a world that had already decided to look away. When he finally spoke publicly about his sexuality, the reaction was brutal. The same industry that once praised his courage now locked him out. Casting calls stopped, phone calls stopped. Hollywood had turned its back. But Sal never stopped creating. He directed, he taught, he dreamed of a comeback. In 1976, he was rehearsing for a new play in Los Angeles, finally happy again, finally alive. Then, one February night, he parked his car outside his home. A man waited in the shadows. A knife flashed once. Sal Mineo fell to the ground, his name barely whispered before it disappeared. He was 37. The police called it a random killing, but to those who knew him, it didn't feel random at all. It felt like Hollywood's final rejection, a silent punishment for a man who dared to be honest in a town built on lies. Burt Lancaster's note about Sal was short, almost an apology. He was one of the few who never pretended, and that's why they forgot him. Today, Sal Mineo's face appears in old film reels, frozen beside James Dean's. Two young men chasing truth in a world allergic to it. Two souls who burned bright enough to light the darkness and paid for it with everything they had. Rock Hudson, the perfect leading man. Tall, charming, effortlessly handsome, the kind of man every woman dreamed of and every studio wanted to own. He was the face of American masculinity in the 1950s, the hero who made romance look safe and simple. But behind that smile, behind that smooth voice and calm stare, was truth that Hollywood was never ready to accept. Hudson's career was built carefully, almost scientifically. Universal Pictures crafted his public image like a product. Every interview rehearsed, every photo inspected, every rumor managed. He was taught how to speak, how to stand, how to love on camera, at least. Because off camera, Rock Hudson was living a life no one was allowed to see. He was a gay man in an industry that treated that truth like a death sentence. If the public ever found out, the studio's golden boy would vanish overnight. So they built a wall around him: agents, handlers, fake romances. They even arranged a marriage to his secretary, Phyllis Gates, to silence the whispers. The papers called it love. The people believed it. But inside, Rock Hudson was drowning. He lived with constant fear, the fear of discovery, the fear of losing everything he had built. He hid behind charm, humor, and kindness, carrying a secret that grew heavier with every passing year. On set, he was adored by co-stars and admired by directors. But when the lights went out, he went home alone. In public, he played the perfect man. In private, he searched for freedom in shadows. As the decades passed, the world began to change, but not fast enough. By the 1980s, his once unbreakable image began to crack. Rumors returned. Tabloids whispered. And then, in 1985, the truth came out in the cruelest way possible. Rock Hudson announced he had AIDS. It was a confession that shook the world. The first major star to speak those words out loud. The man who had once represented the ideal of strength and masculinity was now the face of a disease that society refused to understand. But his courage changed everything. His illness forced the world to look not just at him, but at its own cruelty. When he appeared frail and dying on television, people cried, not just for Rock Hudson, but for everyone who had been forced to live a lie. He died later that same year at 59. The tabloids printed his secrets as headlines. The studios tried to erase their guilt with tributes, but his final act wasn't about Hollywood. It was about truth. Burt Lancaster's diary summed it up in a single line. He spent his life pretending to be the man they wanted. In the end, he became the man they feared honest. Rock Hudson's legacy isn't just in the films he made. It's in the moment he stopped hiding. The moment when the mask fell and for the first time, the world saw the man, not the illusion. Cary Grant. The name alone sounds like perfection, a man born to wear a tuxedo, smile on cue, and make the impossible look easy. To the world, he was charm made human, suave, intelligent, endlessly graceful. But what the world didn't see was that Cary Grant was a performance the most convincing role he ever played. He wasn't born into elegance. He was born Archibald Leach in Bristol, England, a boy from a broken home, abandoned by his father and haunted by a secret that followed him for life. When Cary was 9 years old, his mother disappeared. His father told him she had gone away to rest. Years later, Grant learned the truth. She had been placed in a mental institution without his knowledge. That wound never healed. He left home as a teenager and joined a traveling acrobatic troupe. He learned to move with precision, to balance, to perform. And from that discipline, a new man was born, smooth, confident, unshakable. Archie Leach became Cary Grant, and Hollywood fell in love. He became the leading man of a generation, witty, composed, perfect from every angle. But the man inside that perfection was restless. He once said, "Everyone wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant." He was trapped inside his own invention, admired by millions, but never at peace. Off-screen, his life was far from the glossy romance of his films. He married 5 times, searching for something real, but finding only reflections of the roles he played. Friends described him as charming but unreachable a man, surrounded by people yet profoundly alone. As the years passed, whispers followed him about his relationships, about his private life, about who he truly was. Grant ignored them, smiling his way through every interview, every headline. He didn't fight the rumors. He simply outlived them. But behind that calm exterior was a man searching for meaning in a world that rewarded illusion. During the 1950s, he began experimenting with LSD long before it became a scandalous word. Not for pleasure, but for self-discovery. He believed the drug helped him confront the pain he had buried since childhood. In interviews, he said it showed him parts of himself that fame had erased. Hollywood didn't understand. They called it eccentric. But in truth, it was a man trying to find the person he used to be, the boy who lost his mother, the boy who wanted to feel loved without pretending. Cary Grant retired from acting at the height of his fame. He didn't fade, he simply stepped out of the spotlight and never looked back. In his final years, he spoke little about his career. He preferred to talk about peace, reflection, and family things that had always been out of reach while he was playing the part of a legend. When he died in 1986, the world mourned the loss of the man it thought it knew. But the truth is, no one ever really knew Cary Grant, not the press, not the fans, not even Cary himself. Burt Lancaster wrote of him, "He mastered the art of pretending until he became the illusion itself. The tragedy of Cary Grant is that the world never met Archibald Leach, and neither did he." Clark Gable. Hollywood called him the King. He had the smile, the swagger, the voice, that easy confidence that made men admire him and women fall at his feet. He was the kind of star who didn't just act in films, he defined them. But even kings bleed. Before the fame, before Gone with the Wind, Gable was just a drifter from Ohio, a young man who worked in oil fields and theaters, chasing a dream that seemed too big for him. He had no special advantage, no family in the business, no polished education. Just ambition, a sharp jawline, and the will to outlast everyone else. Hollywood saw him as a diamond in the rough. They cut him, polished him, and put a crown on his head. But the price of that crown was obedience. He became what the studios demanded: masculine perfection, a walking fantasy of strength and charm. To the world, he looked invincible. Inside, he was exhausted. He hated interviews, hated publicity, hated being treated like a product. But he knew how the game worked. If he wanted to stay the king, he had to play the role. So he smiled on cue, delivered his lines, and hid the weariness behind his eyes. Then came Gone with the Wind. Rhett Butler turned him into legend. Every word he spoke became immortal. But when the cameras stopped, he felt nothing. He once told a friend, "I'm just tired of pretending to be the man they think I am." His real life was far from royal. He married multiple times, but the one woman who truly changed him was Carole Lombard. She was fearless, funny, and as untamed as he was. For the first time, Gable felt human, not a star, but a man in love. They married in 1939, and for 3 years, they were inseparable. Then the war came, and tragedy followed. In January 1942, Carole Lombard died in a plane crash while returning from a war bond tour. When Gable received the news, something inside him shattered. The King of Hollywood fell to his knees. He blamed himself for her death, and he never truly recovered. He enlisted in the Army Air Forces soon after, not for publicity, but to feel pain that matched the one already inside him. He flew dangerous missions over Europe, risking his life again and again. When he returned, he was older, heavier, quieter. The sparkle was gone. The laughter felt forced. He kept working the Misfits, Command Decision, Mogambo films that kept his legend alive. But those who knew him said the man behind the legend had stopped caring long ago. On November 16, 1960, Clark Gable died from a heart attack. He was 59. The press called it sudden. Those who knew him said it wasn't sudden at all. The heart he had been breaking for years. But Lancaster wrote of him, "He carried himself like royalty, but he was never the king. He was a soldier, wounded in a war that Hollywood never stopped fighting. The war between the man and the myth. And when the lights dimmed, the crown slipped quietly from his head, leaving behind a truth that no studio ever printed, even King's Fall. Gene Kelly. To the world, he was pure energy, a man who seemed to float instead of walk, whose joy could turn a puddle into a stage. He wasn't just a dancer, he was rhythm made human. But behind every leap, every grin, there was pressure and pain. Kelly changed musical cinema forever. When he danced in Singing in the Rain, he made it look effortless, a man celebrating life in the middle of a storm. Audiences saw happiness. What they didn't see were the blisters, the fever, the exhaustion. He filmed that legendary scene while sick, sweating through every take until the water felt like ice and the smile felt like armor. Hollywood adored him, but it demanded too much. Kelly was a perfectionist, obsessed with control. He choreographed every frame, dictated every movement, and expected the same from everyone around him. His partners adored him and feared him in equal measure. Debbie Reynolds once said working with him was like surviving a war with beauty as the prize. He wanted everything perfect, not for ego, but because imperfection reminded him of the chaos he'd escaped. He came from poverty, from Pittsburgh's working-class neighborhoods, where dancing wasn't seen as a man's art. He fought for respect in an industry that valued smiles more than sweat. Every pirouette was proof that he belonged. But success became a prison. The very grace that made him immortal trapped him inside an image he couldn't age out of. As musicals began to fade, so did the roles. The studios moved on to younger faces, lighter trends. Gene Kelly, the symbol of joy, was quietly written out of the script. He turned to directing, producing, teaching, trying to keep his art alive as Hollywood lost interest in dance. He spoke often about the loneliness of perfection, about how audiences only saw the result, never the sacrifice. He once said, "If people knew how hard I worked to get my grace, it wouldn't seem so graceful at all." Off-screen, his personal life mirrored his discipline, measured, structured, distant. He was kind but demanding, loving yet impossible to please. Those closest to him learned that even his tenderness had choreography. As years passed, Kelly watched the world he'd built vanish, the sound stages silent, the orchestras gone, the tap shoes left behind in dust. He aged gracefully, but his art didn't. And the man who once made movement look eternal faced the one thing he couldn't choreograph: time. When he died in 1996, the tributes called him the man who danced happiness. But in his notebooks there were darker thoughts, reflections on art, loneliness, and the silence that comes when the music stops. Burt Lancaster's diary captured it in one line. He danced for the world, but never for himself. The rain stopped long before the applause did. Gene Kelly gave Hollywood movement, joy, rhythm, and in return it gave him immortality wrapped in melancholy. Tony Curtis, the perfect face, the dream every casting agent wanted to sell. Sharp cheekbones, a flawless smile, eyes that made the cameras trust him instantly. He was the embodiment of Hollywood glamour and also one of its quietest prisoners. In 1948, a boy from the Bronx walked into Universal Studios with nothing but ambition. Within 5 minutes, an aging producer looked him over and said, "I think you could be a star, but first, tell me, are you obedient?" It wasn't a joke. It was a test, and Curtis understood it perfectly. To get his first screen role, he did what countless young actors before him had done in silence. He learned the real script of Hollywood, the one written behind locked doors. A few hours of humiliation for a lifetime of opportunity. That was the exchange rate of fame. Curtis's looks became his weapon and his curse. He was paraded through private parties and business meetings where powerful men traded favors like currency. He once whispered to a co-star, "To get roles, I've done things that weren't in the script." It was the truest line he ever delivered. By the mid-1950s, Tony Curtis was everywhere the studio's golden boy, starring in Sweet Smell of Success, Some Like It Hot, and Spartacus. But every time the flashbulbs went off, a piece of him disappeared. He kept smiling, kept moving, kept pretending that success didn't have fingerprints all over his soul. Behind closed doors, he was haunted by what he traded. He drank too much, he worked too hard, he chased validation like a drug. Hollywood called him charming. He called himself a man who forgot how to stop acting. Even in later interviews, Curtis hinted at the toll. "I did what I had to do. Back then, if you said no once, you never worked again." It wasn't confession, it was survival finally spoken out loud. When the spotlight faded, he reinvented himself as a painter, a storyteller, a survivor. Yet the colors on his canvas always carried a quiet ache, the memories he couldn't wash away. He once wrote, "I was beautiful once, but beauty is just another costume. It never belonged to me." Burt Lancaster's diary ends his entry on Curtis with a single sentence. He smiled for a living, but behind that smile was a boy still waiting for the door to open, one that didn't lead to another room full of strangers. Tony Curtis died in 2010 at the age of 85, a man who survived Hollywood but never escaped it. His films remain vibrant, his legacy immortal. Yet beneath every frame lies a question that still echoes today. How much of him was acting and how much was a cry for freedom? Anthony Perkins. To the world, he will always be Norman Bates, the quiet boy with the shy smile and the knife behind the curtain. But long before Psycho made him a symbol of terror, he was already living inside a different kind of horror, the fear of being seen for who he really was. Born in 1932, the son of stage actor Osgood Perkins, Anthony grew up surrounded by applause but starving for affection. When his father died suddenly, the boy retreated inward, polite, delicate, uncertain. Hollywood saw vulnerability. He saw weakness. When he arrived in Los Angeles, the studios adored his innocence. Tall, handsome, soft-spoken, he was the perfect tragic heartthrob of the 1950s, the man women wanted to heal. But the truth was something no studio contract could allow. Anthony Perkins was gay, in an era when a single rumor could end a career overnight. Executives at Paramount built a cage around him, public girlfriends, photo shoot romances, rehearsed interviews. Behind the scenes, Perkins was ushered into private circles where powerful producers and secretive benefactors protected young men like him for a price. He learned early that survival in Hollywood meant performance on screen, off screen, and everywhere in between. A friend once recalled that Anthony lived in constant contradiction. He hated lying, yet lying was the only way to exist. He once said quietly, "Every role I play feels safer than being myself." Then came Alfred Hitchcock. Psycho turned him into legend and trapped him in that legend forever. After Norman Bates, every producer wanted him to be the same fragile monster, the polite man with something broken inside. Perkins tried to escape, taking stage roles, traveling to Europe, chasing anonymity. But the label followed him like a ghost. By the late 1970s, the secret that had once defined him became an open wound. He entered a long relationship with dancer Barry Berenson, a rare space where he found both affection and cover. They married in 1973, more out of safety than scandal, though love eventually found its way in. Together they had 2 sons, but even in family photos, there's a sadness, a man smiling through glass. When the AIDS epidemic began, Perkins withdrew further from public life. For years he denied being sick. For decades he had hidden who he was, and now, even as death approached, he continued the act. In his final interview, he said, "There are fears that never leave you. You just learn to decorate them." Anthony Perkins died in 1992 at 60 years old. Only after his death did his wife reveal the truth that he had been fighting AIDS in silence, refusing pity, refusing headlines. He left behind a legacy of brilliance shadowed by repression and a question that Hollywood still hasn't answered. How many more men smiled on screen while suffocating off it? Burt Lancaster's note about Perkins was brief but devastating. He lived his whole life pretending not to be afraid, but every mirror in Hollywood showed him the same thing, the boy who never stopped hiding. Dennis Hopper, the rebel poet of New Hollywood. The man who turned madness into art and chaos into currency. But even rebels have a price. In the 1950s, he was the young idealist, fierce, hungry, determined to prove that truth on film was worth any sacrifice, and for a time he lived it. But truth in Hollywood has a cost, and the bill always comes due. By the mid-1960s, Hopper was blacklisted, branded uncontrollable, dangerous, difficult. Directors refused to work with him. Producers stopped taking his calls. He'd become the man everyone admired on screen and avoided in real life. Then, one night, in a mansion high above Mulholland Drive, the rebel surrendered. He attended a private casting party, the kind whispered about but never written down, where lost actors traded their bodies for one last chance at a role. According to director Nicholas Ray's memoir, Hopper stayed until sunrise serving an older financier in exchange for a promise that became The Sons of Katie Elder, 1965, the film that resurrected his career. Hopper's ex-girlfriend, actress Brooke Haywood, once said, "Dennis would endure anything, even humiliation, if it meant stepping in front of the camera again." And that's exactly what he did. He wore his pride like a mask and his shame like a scar. To the world, he was the outlaw artist, easy rider, the man who defied the system. But in private, he was the same boy who once said yes to survive. He told Rolling Stone in 1983, "I used to be a bastard, but before that, I was a good boy, serving rich men just to do what I loved." Then he paused and added something darker. "Where's the line in these trades? Because sometimes you don't sell yourself once. You sell yourself in pieces night after night until there's nothing left to keep." Hopper kept moving, kept creating, kept pretending he had escaped, but you can't escape a deal made with the system that made you. Even as he rebuilt himself as a filmmaker and icon, the ghost of those nights followed him. Every success was a reminder of what it had cost. In the end, Dennis Hopper's story wasn't about rebellion. It was about survival in a town that eats its children and then sells their bones as memorabilia. Burt Lancaster's final line about Hopper reads like an obituary written in cigarette ash. He sold his soul to get back on screen, and the world called it art. Rudolph Valentino, Hollywood's first heartthrob, the Latin lover, the man whose face made women faint and men envious. But before he was worshipped, he was owned. In the early 1910s, Valentino was just another immigrant wandering the streets of New York, penniless, hungry, and desperate for work. He washed dishes, waited tables, and slept wherever he could find a corner. According to biographer Emily Lyder, he was fired from a restaurant for being too friendly with certain male customers. That smile, the one that later conquered cinema, almost destroyed him first. One night, a fellow worker introduced him to a private club known only as Mickey. It was no dance hall. It was a place where wealthy men could rent beautiful boys for the night, $50 per visit. Valentino said no at first, but when someone threatened to report his illegal residency, he hesitated. He needed money. He needed protection. And soon, every week, someone came to take him home. One of those men was producer Norman Cary, a powerful name and the key to Valentino's first real opportunity. Cary brought him to California, helped him land a small role in The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, 1921. It made him a star overnight. But stardom came wrapped in silence, because Hollywood only wanted the illusion, not the story behind it. On screen, he was the ultimate lover, adored and untouchable. Off screen, he was a man haunted by what he had to do to get there. He lived his life performing not just for cameras, but for survival. In a note discovered after his death, written in fragile, trembling handwriting, he confessed, "The world calls me their lover, but the first night I lay still, no one kissed me at all. The industry worshipped his body, but never saw the man inside it." He became the fantasy that defined an era perfect, exotic, tragic. And when he died in 1926 at just 31, the world wept for a legend without ever knowing his truth. Thousands fainted at his funeral. Women wore black for months, but none of them knew the secret carved beneath the marble mask. Burt Lancaster's note about Valentino was short and cruelly poetic. They built a god out of a boy who once sold himself just to eat. Hollywood kissed his name, but never his wounds. Time = 2S. Tyrone Power. The name alone was enough to make Hollywood blush. With his sharp features and magnetic eyes, he became the face of American cinema in the 1940s, a man every studio wanted and every audience desired. But beauty in Hollywood is never free. It's the most expensive currency of all. In 1936, long before the world knew his name, Tyrone was invited to a private retreat in Palm Springs. An older producer, later named in FBI files for hosting secret casting parties, promised him opportunity. When Power arrived, he was asked to try on swimwear. Then obedience. By morning, he had a 5-year contract with 20th Century Fox and a debt that could never be repaid. A staff member later told journalist William Manower, "They all started innocent. By the end of the weekend, none of them were." For years, Power played the role of the dashing hero, the soldier, the lover, the man who could rescue anyone but himself. His calendar was filled with studio dinners and private events sponsored by Hollywood elites who knew exactly what those words meant. When he appeared at the Brown Derby nightclub, whispers followed. Everyone knew his beauty wasn't just a blessing, it was his burden. His close friend, actor Cesar Romero, once said, "Tyrone knew that to stay where he was, he had to protect the image, even if that meant losing himself entirely." Because in Hollywood, truth was a luxury no one could afford. He became a master of charm, masking exhaustion with grace, but every smile hid a transaction and every role carried a shadow. The perfect gentleman on screen was a man quietly suffocating off it. In the late 1940s, Power began to speak about leaving the business. He told friends he wanted to escape to act on stage again, when no one cared about contracts or private appointments. But Hollywood doesn't let go of its angels. It drains them, then buries them beneath their own beauty. In 1958, while filming Solomon and Sheba in Madrid, Tyrone collapsed on set. He was just 44 years old. The official cause was a heart attack, but his friends whispered that his heart had been breaking for years. He died in costume, the perfect image to the end. A Hollywood god who never got to be human. Burt Lancaster's entry about power read like a confession. He learned too early that beauty here isn't a blessing, it's a debt, and he kept paying it until there was nothing left to give. Montgomery Clift. The beautiful tragedy. The actor who redefined sensitivity in men, and the man who couldn't bear to live inside his own reflection. He came from privilege, from comfort, from a world that promised him everything. But he didn't want wealth, he wanted truth, and Hollywood gave him lies wrapped in applause. In 1948, Clift exploded onto the screen in Red River and A Place in the Sun. He was the opposite of everything the industry had celebrated before. Quiet, fragile, sincere. He didn't act, he felt. Audiences saw vulnerability. Producers saw a new kind of gold. They called him the thinking woman's idol, but behind the camera, he was simply a man terrified of being found out. Montgomery Clift was gay at a time when being honest meant exile. So he hid behind method acting, behind long silences and trembling eyes, playing the roles that mirrored his own torment. He told friends, "I don't act to be seen, I act to disappear." As his fame grew, so did the control. Studio executives arranged dates with female stars to protect his image. Photographers were instructed to never print candid photos of him in private. Even his friends were warned not to speak his truth. He lived surrounded by mirrors that showed him everyone but himself. Then came the accident. May 12, 1956. Driving home from a party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, his car swerved off the road and slammed into a telephone pole. The crash shattered his face, his jaw broken, nose crushed, teeth scattered across the dashboard. Taylor was the first to reach him, pulling the debris from his throat so he could breathe again. But the man who opened his eyes wasn't the same one who had closed them. Surgery restored his features, but not his spirit. The mirror became his enemy. His pain became invisible, hidden under makeup and studio smiles. His performances after the accident, in The Misfits, and Judgment at Nuremberg, carried a sadness too deep to fake. He no longer played broken men, he was one. Alcohol became his medicine, pills his only peace. Friends called him self-destructive. He called it endurance. He was no longer chasing fame. He was chasing silence. In 1966, they found him dead in his New York apartment. The radio was still playing The Misfits. The coroner called it a heart attack. Those who loved him called it surrender. Burt Lancaster's note about him was brief, almost tender. He carried his truth like a stone in his mouth. He couldn't speak it, so he swallowed it whole. Montgomery Clift's legacy was not built on power or beauty, but on pain. He showed the world that masculinity could cry, and that truth in Hollywood could kill you just as easily as fame. Tab Hunter, the picture-perfect American dream. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smile clean enough to sell innocence in Technicolor. He was the studio's safest bet, a man sculpted to make the world forget its shadows. But inside, Tab Hunter was living in one. Born Arthur Kelman, New York in 1931, he grew up shy, awkward, unsure of where he fit. The Marines gave him discipline. Hollywood gave him a mask. When Warner Brothers discovered him, they renamed him Tab Hunter, a name that sounded like a brand, not a person. His agent told him Arthur Kelman won't sell, Tab Hunter will. And from that day on, Arthur was gone. He became the symbol of 1950s purity, the boy next door who could do no wrong. His films were light, safe, and profitable. He sang, he danced, he smiled. To the public, he was the dream every mother wanted for her daughter, But behind closed doors, he was the nightmare every studio feared. Because Tab Hunter was gay, and in 1950s Hollywood, that was a secret worth destroying lives to protect. Every date was staged. Every photo with a female co-star was scripted. Every rumor had to be silenced before it became a headline. He lived under constant supervision, watched by publicists and studio executives who controlled every aspect of his existence. They told him, "You can be anything you want as long as you're not yourself." In 1955, a gossip magazine exposed his name in a police raid on a private party. The story never reached print. The studio paid to bury it, but the warning was clear. One mistake, one whisper, and everything would vanish. Hunter learned to live in disguise. He dated Natalie Wood for publicity, even though she was one of the few people who knew the truth. They laughed about it quietly, two young stars trapped in an industry built on pretending. When his contract with Warner Brothers ended, the offers slowed. The next generation of stars arrived more rebellious, more dangerous, and the clean-cut image that once made him famous now made him obsolete. By the 1970s, he had been replaced, forgotten, erased from the dream he once embodied. But Tab Hunter didn't disappear. He reinvented himself. He moved to stage work, to independent films, to a life outside the spotlight. And slowly, quietly, he began to tell the truth. In 2005, his autobiography, Tab Hunter Confidential, revealed the secret Hollywood had forced him to hide for half a century. He wrote, not in bitterness, but in peace. I spent most of my life playing a part that wasn't written by me. Now I finally get to speak my own lines. When he passed away in 2018 at 86 years old, the headlines called him the last golden boy. But in truth, he was something else, a survivor who outlived the lie. Burt Lancaster's diary ended his entry on Hunter with a line that felt like forgiveness. They built him out of sunlight and silence. He chose, at last, to break the silence, and that was his real performance. Richard Chamberlain, the perfect gentleman of the small screen. Soft-spoken, intelligent, the kind of man audiences could trust with their hearts. In the 1960s, he became America's favorite Dr. Kildare, the symbol of compassion, strength, and quiet heroism. But behind the calm voice and careful smile was a man who spent decades healing everyone but himself. Born in Beverly Hills in 1934, Chamberlain was raised inside the illusion before he ever entered it. He was handsome, talented, polite, exactly the kind of man Hollywood could polish into perfection. When Dr. Kildare premiered in 1961, it turned him into an overnight sensation. Fans sent thousands of letters every week. His face was on every magazine. He was called the new Cary Grant, but the truth was buried under every headline. Because Richard Chamberlain was gay, and at that time, being honest meant suicide for a career. So the studio built a wall of fiction around him. Public dates with actresses, interviews about marriage plans, photos arranged down to the minute. Even his smile was rehearsed. He played the part perfectly. A healer on television, a heartthrob in public, a man in hiding when the cameras stopped rolling. He once said, "I was living someone else's dream and it was killing me softly." Throughout the 1970s, Chamberlain tried to distance himself from Dr. Kildare. He took darker roles in The Fallen Birds, Shogun, and The Bourne Identity. Each performance showed a man searching for truth in a world built on illusion. But even as he changed characters, he couldn't change his reality. He was still trapped in a contract of silence, one that Hollywood had written long before he was born. He spent decades guarding that secret, terrified that honesty would erase everything he had worked for. It wasn't until 2003 in his memoir Shattered Love that he finally told the truth. He wrote, "I was afraid for so long, afraid that being myself meant losing everything. And in a way, I did lose everything except myself." By then, Hollywood had changed. But for Chamberlain, the years of silence had already carved their scars. He lived quietly, gracefully, at peace with the cost of surviving, in an industry that never truly forgave honesty. When asked late in life if he regretted hiding, he said softly, "I don't regret surviving. I just wish I hadn't had to hide to do it." Burt Lancaster's note about him was almost compassionate. He played doctors, priests, lovers, men who saved others, but he couldn't save himself from the fear Hollywood taught him to feel. Richard Chamberlain's story isn't one of scandal or downfall. It's a story of endurance of a man who learned that truth may destroy an image, but it can also heal a soul. Troy Donahue. For a moment, he was the face of innocence, the golden boy who made teenage hearts flutter and studio executives rich. His smile was California sunlight, his hair the color of the dream itself. But like every golden image Hollywood creates, it was built to fade. Born Merle Johnson Jr., in New York City, he arrived in Hollywood with nothing but good looks and naive hope. Warner Brothers took one look and saw potential profit. They gave him a new name, Troy Donahue, and a contract that looked like destiny. He was marketed as the perfect young man, clean, kind, safe, the type mothers trusted and daughters dreamed of. Between 1959 and 1963, Donahue starred in the string of hits, A Summer Place, Parish, Rome Adventure. He became a symbol of youth and romance. His face was on magazines, his autograph on every schoolgirl's notebook. But behind the poster boy smile was a man being slowly consumed by the machine that made him. The studio controlled everything: his hair, his diet, his dates, his entire life. They scripted interviews, staged relationships, even decided who he could be seen with in public. He once confessed to a friend, "They built me out of paper, and then they were shocked when I tore." By the mid-1960s, the dream was over. Audiences wanted rebellion, not romance. Hollywood moved on to Dustin Hoffman and Jack Nicholson faces that looked real, raw, unpolished. Troy Donahue was suddenly out of place, a man frozen in a decade that no longer existed. The offers stopped. The money vanished. He turned to alcohol and drugs to quiet the noise of irrelevance. For a time, he was homeless, sleeping in friends' cars, telling strangers that he used to be someone. He never complained, he just faded with dignity. In the 1980s, he made a modest comeback in television and independent films, not as a star, but as a man finally allowed to be himself, older, wiser, and unmasked. He said in one of his last interviews, "Hollywood didn't destroy me, it just taught me how to let go." When he died in 2001, few remembered the idol he once was. But those who did remembered kindness, humility, and a smile that never belonged to a villain. Burt Lancaster's note about him was simple, and it hurt to read. He was the only angel Hollywood didn't break, just forgot to call back. Troy Donahue's rise and fall wasn't a scandal. It was a quiet funeral for innocence the moment the dream finally admitted it was just a movie. Van Johnson. Hollywood's golden boy of the war, years the man who made America, believed that decency could be glamorous. With his ginger hair, polite grin, and steady charm, he looked like the kind of man you could trust with your life. And for a time, that's exactly what Hollywood sold him as, the everyman hero who never broke, never lied, never sinned. But the truth was far from that perfect poster smile. Born in Rhode Island in 1916, Johnson grew up quiet, lonely, and hungry for escape. His father was distant, his home cold. The movies became his sanctuary, places where men were brave, women were kind, and the world always made sense by the final reel. He wanted to live inside that fantasy. Instead, he learned how to fake it. When MGM discovered him, they found what they called the boy next door America needed. He was clean-cut, respectful, and photogenic. They crafted his entire persona with precision, every outfit, every interview, every smile rehearsed. And like so many others before him, he signed the contract that said everything he did belonged to them. But MGM's dream came with rules. Van Johnson's truth, his relationships, his identity couldn't exist in the open. Studio fixers arranged fake romances, staged publicity photos, and kept a watchful eye on his private life. He was often seen with co-stars like June Allison and Gloria DeHaven, not because he wanted to be, but because the studio told him he must. He played the romantic lead on screen, but off-screen he lived a life scripted by fear. His close friends knew the truth that Van was gay, but no one dared to say it out loud. In the 1940s, silence was survival, and MGM demanded silence. When rumors began to spread, the studio forced him into a marriage with actress Eve Abbott, who was previously linked to another MGM star. The arrangement kept the headlines clean and the box office strong. Johnson once confided to a friend, "They took my smile and sold it back to me." Behind the grin, there was loneliness, depression, and the quiet ache of a man who had been turned into property. During World War II, while real soldiers fought overseas, Van played them on screen brave, loyal, unbreakable. The public adored him, believing he represented the best of America. But when the war ended and the world grew darker, his type of innocence became old-fashioned. The role slowed. The spotlight dimmed. The soldier had served his purpose. He continued working for decades theater, television, small films, never bitter, always graceful. But those who met him in his later years described a gentleness tinged with sadness, as if part of him still lived in the dream he once sold so perfectly. Van Johnson died in 2008 at 92. The papers called him Hollywood's gentleman, and maybe he was. But the man beneath the legend was something else, a survivor who smiled for a lifetime because he wasn't allowed to speak. Burt Lancaster's note about him reads like an epitaph carved in silence, and he smiled so the world wouldn't ask what it cost him. George Maharis. For a brief, burning moment, he was the image of Cool, the restless drifter, the open road, the man every woman wanted and every man envied. In the early 1960s, his show Route 66 turned him into a household name. He wasn't just acting, he was the dream, young, wild, and free. But in Hollywood, freedom always comes with a price. Born in Queens in 1928, Maharis was one of 7 children in a struggling Greek immigrant family. He worked his way up from nothing waiting tables, taking acting classes, hustling for auditions, until television finally called his name. He was cast as Buzz Murdoch, the rough-edged traveler with a heart of gold. Women adored him, men wanted to be him, and CBS knew they had their next big star. But George Maharis was living a double life, one that the cameras could never see. He was gay, and he knew exactly what that meant in 1960s Hollywood. He once said privately, "They love you as long as you lie to them." The studio system demanded silence. Publicists controlled his image down to the last smile. He was forbidden to be seen in certain places, told to avoid dangerous company, and ordered to play straight always. He followed the rules for a while. Then he got sick. During the 3rd season of Route 66, Maharis contracted hepatitis. The studio claimed he left the show due to illness, but the truth was darker. CBS executives had grown nervous about rumors about parties, photographs, whispers from the press. When Maharis refused to live in fear, they labeled him uncooperative. He was fired. And just like that, his road ended. By 1967, the headlines had turned on him. An arrest in a Los Angeles restroom charges that were quietly dropped became the death sentence for his career. He was blacklisted, erased, replaced by newer, safer faces. The same industry that once made him a symbol of freedom now treated him like a ghost. He tried to rebuild singing, painting, taking small roles, but the doors never truly reopened. Still, Maharis never apologized for being himself. He lived quietly, proudly, refusing to play the part they'd written for him. When asked years later how he survived, he said, "You stop expecting forgiveness from people who never wanted you to exist." He died in 2023 at 94, long after Hollywood had forgotten his name, but not his courage. Burt Lancaster's diary captured it best. They put him on the road to self-freedom, then punished him for living it. George Maharis's story is the story of the dream undone, how Hollywood sells liberty on screen and chains it behind the curtain. Ramon Navarro, the man the world once called the Latin lover before Valentino. He was elegance, grace, and charm, a symbol of Hollywood's silent golden age. But behind the smooth smile and saintly eyes was a man living a secret life, one the world would destroy him for. For José Ramón Gil Samaniego in Durango, Mexico, Navarro came to America chasing dreams, not fame, just survival. He found both. By the 1920s, he was one of MGM's brightest stars, replacing Rudolph Valentino as the ultimate romantic idol. In Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, he wasn't just an actor, he was a revelation. Hollywood had found its new god. But gods don't live forever, especially not ones with secrets. As the decades passed, the spotlight dimmed. The silent era ended. The talkies came. And Ramon, the man who once made women faint in theaters, was left behind living alone in his Laurel Canyon home, surrounded by photos of a world that had moved on without him. He was still beautiful, still kind, still gentle, but he was lonely. Then came the night of October 31st, 1968. Halloween. Police arrived at his home after neighbors reported screams. They found Ramon dead naked, strangled with a telephone cord, his mouth stuffed with tissue, blood pooled on the carpet. He was 69 years old. His killers were two brothers, Paul and Tom Ferguson, young hustlers he had invited to his home. They were after money they thought he kept hidden. They tortured him, demanding to know where he stored it. There was none, just old furniture, fading photos and memories. But what the newspapers didn't print, at least not in full, was the other list the police found. A list of special clients, actors, directors, politicians. Powerful men who had once come to that same house for reasons they all denied later. Ramon had entertained them for decades, not out of greed, but out of the desperate need to stay connected to the only world he had ever known. In one court testimony, a former client whispered, "I met him when I was 17. He said, 'Behave, and I'll get you into a film.' And he did. That was Ramon's curse. He had learned early that beauty could buy survival, but never peace. When the trial ended, the press called it the death of the last silent star. But what they really meant was the death of a man who lived too loud for a silent world. He was buried quietly. Few attended. No studio sent flowers. No co-star spoke his name again. In Hollywood, memory is a liability, and Ramon Navarro became a ghost. In his diary, Burt Lancaster wrote, "He gave the world everything it wanted except the lie it demanded." Ramon Navarro's story is not just about death. It's about the price of beauty, the cruelty of silence, and the system that kills those who refuse to hide. Farley Granger, the soft-spoken boy who made audiences fall in love with the idea of innocence, the perfect face for the golden age of American cinema, young, handsome, and safe. But behind those tender eyes was a life bound by fear, secrets, and submission. He first rose to fame in Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, 1948, his gentle charm and anxious energy instantly hypnotizing moviegoers. To the public, he was a sweetheart, a shy dreamer who blushed on camera. To Hollywood, he was something else entirely, property. In 1950, Granger entered a consuming secret relationship with screenwriter Arthur Lawrence, the man behind West Side Story and The Way We Were. Lawrence was older, brilliant, and dangerous in the way that only power can be. He guided Granger's every move, what roles to take, who to meet, what to say. Farley later wrote in his memoir, Include Me Out, "Arthur taught me how to love, how to pretend, and how to lie down when I needed to keep a role." Their relationship lasted more than 15 years, but in those 15 years, Granger was never free. Every studio meeting, every party invitation came with whispers. Who did he sleep with this week? Hollywood's corridors were filled with laughter and poison. A production assistant once made a joke about him on the set of Strangers on a Train. By morning, that man was fired, his name erased from the call sheet. That was how power worked in those days. Granger lived like a man, trapped between light and shadow. He couldn't deny who he was, but he couldn't admit it either. He once said near the end of his life, "I loved, I was used, but I don't regret it. In this world, if you don't let them touch your body, they'll never let you touch the spotlight." He aged quietly, watching from a distance as younger stars repeated his story. Different names, same bargain. The boy from Rope had learned that every knot tied in love was also a leash. In the end, Farley Granger's tragedy wasn't that he was forgotten. It was that he lived long enough to remember everything, every promise, every betrayal, every secret kiss that kept the illusion alive. As Burt Lancaster wrote in the margins of his diary, he wasn't destroyed by Hollywood. He was consumed by love and the silence that followed. Don Murray. The name doesn't echo like Brando or Dean, yet for a moment in the 1950s, he stood among them clean-cut, gentle. The perfect gentleman every studio wanted to claim. He was the kind of man America trusted. Polite smile, steady gaze, voice like calm water. But behind that composure lived a secret no contract ever mentioned. Born in Hollywood's shadow in 1929, Murray wasn't born into power, he was drafted into it. Before fame, he worked odd jobs, auditioned endlessly, and did what every struggling actor did, waited for someone to open a door. When that door finally opened, it wasn't to a stage, but to a private room. According to an unpublished memoir by a former casting assistant at 20th Century Fox, Murray was once called to an after-hours audition. Inside waited a powerful director, one who could make or break careers with a single phone call. 2 hours later, the young actor emerged pale, silent, and trembling. When asked if he was all right, he whispered, "I think I just sold my soul to be seen through a lens." Days later, he had his first film contract. And soon after, the world saw him beside Marilyn Monroe in Bus Stop, 1956, the picture that made him famous. The critics praised his sincerity, his quiet strength, his dignity. None of them knew the cost. He never confirmed the rumors, but he never denied them either. In a 1982 interview, when asked about Hollywood's hidden trades, he smiled faintly and said, "Some things aren't written into contracts, but everyone knows what they have to do if they want their name on the dotted line." Those words lingered like smoke in open confession, disguised as philosophy. Murray's career faded with time, but he never vanished. He took smaller roles, spoke less, and let the myths stay buried. He was polite to interviewers, gracious to fans, and distant from everyone else. He had learned that survival here wasn't about fame, it was about silence. Burt Lancaster's journal closed his entry on Murray with a single, haunting sentence. He never screamed, never fought, just let them write their names on his skin and called it destiny. Don Murray's story isn't one of scandal, it's one of quiet endurance. He wasn't destroyed by Hollywood's machinery, he simply became a part of it. And when he finally stepped away from the screen, the world forgot the deals that had written his name in invisible ink. Guy Madison. The perfect American man. Square jaw, dazzling smile, and eyes that made every poster look like a promise. He was the cowboy who never missed his mark, the hero who rode off into the sunset with the nation's trust. But before Hollywood gave him a horse and a hat, it gave him something else, a set of keys to locked rooms no one knew he was supposed to talk about. Before the spotlight, Madison was just an unemployed Navy veteran drifting through Los Angeles, sleeping on friends' sofas and hustling for work. See, the studios weren't interested in his acting, they were interested in his appearance, so he found another way to be seen. A former employee of the Beverly Hills Hotel once told a tabloid that before his first film, Guy was regularly hired for private dinners thrown by Hollywood royalty. But he wasn't there to serve steak. He was the steak. Guests would request him shirtless, posed like a statue in the corner, a decoration of desire among crystal and champagne. After 20 minutes of silence, he'd disappear into a bedroom and reappear later, buttoning his shirt as music played louder to drown out the truth. It was an open secret that Guy understood his role long before he was given a script. An anonymous director later wrote in his memoir, "Guy didn't mind. He was beautiful, and he knew it. I once saw him smile as a producer handed him a room key, like it was part of the audition. That smile took him places. A few months later, Guy landed his breakout role as Wild Bill Hickok, the cleanest cowboy on American television. Millions fell in love with him each week, unaware that the same hands that held fake revolvers had once carried trays of wine to Hollywood's most powerful men. When stardom finally found him, he never spoke of those nights. He smiled for the press, posed with his co-stars, and kept the past in the dark where it belonged. But Hollywood never forgets. There were whispers about a photograph that went missing, a hotel guest who was paid to stay silent, a producer who kept his name off credit lists out of fear of what he might reveal. One makeup artist who worked with him in the 1960s said quietly, he looked like the perfect American dream because he was built from every nightmare they sold him. When the cowboy era ended, Guy vanished from the screen as elegantly as he'd entered it. No scandals, no farewell, just to fade to black. He died in 1996, aged 74, a man with a smile too perfect for the truth. Burt Lancaster summed him up with one final line. He didn't serve dinners, he served the system, and the system always ate well. William Haynes, the man who laughed in the face of power and paid for it with everything. Before Clark Gable, before Cary Grant, there was Billy Haynes, the king of the romantic comedies, the golden boy of MGM, and one of the very few men in Hollywood who dared to love honestly, even when honesty could kill a career. In the 1920s, William Haynes was unstoppable. Charming, witty, and devastatingly handsome, he was the studio's most bankable star, the man who made America smile during its darkest decade. Audiences loved him for his laughter, his boyish mischief, and the warmth that filled every frame. But behind the laughter was a man fighting a system that would never forgive him for who he was. Before fame, Haynes did what many desperate dreamers did in those glittering but cruel years he sold himself. Not for pleasure, for survival. In private gentlemen's clubs, hidden behind velvet curtains, young men like him were paraded for the wealthy and powerful. A close friend once recalled Billy's words, "I don't work there for money. I work there to be seen, to be chosen." He was, and the studios noticed. Soon MGM came calling, offering him a contract and a future. He took it not realizing he was stepping from one kind of ownership into another. For years he balanced two lives, on-screen lover to a dozen women, off-screen partner to one man, Jimmy Shields. They lived quietly together, pretending to be just roommates. But the charade couldn't last forever. In 1933, police raided a Los Angeles hotel and found Haynes in bed with a young man. By morning, the scandal was everywhere. Louis B. Mayer, the all-powerful head of MGM, gave him a choice. Marry a woman for the cameras, or lose everything. Haynes didn't hesitate. "I love him," he said. "I won't give him up." Those 6 words ended his career. The contracts vanished. The friends disappeared. The invitations stopped coming. Hollywood turned its back on its brightest star. But Billy didn't break. He reinvented himself not as an actor, but as one of the most sought-after interior designers in Beverly Hills. His clients, the very same studio executives who once fired him. He decorated their homes with grace, laughter, and silence. In his later years, he lived peacefully with Jimmy. They never hid again. When Haynes died in 1973, Jimmy couldn't live without him. He took his own life shortly after, leaving a note that read, "Good night, my darling. I'll see you soon." Near the end of his life, Haynes was once asked if he regretted anything. He smiled and said, "I don't regret loving, but I regret having to sell that love just to buy back my career." Hollywood would never forgive him, but history would. Because in an industry built on illusion, William Haynes was the rare soul who refused to act off camera. He was the first man to fall from grace and rise again without asking for permission. Burt Lancaster ended his journal entry on Haynes with a single line. "He lost the screen, but he won himself, and that's the role no one else could play." If anyone knew who slept with whom in Hollywood's golden age, it was Scotty Bowers. To the world, he was just a cheerful gas station attendant on Hollywood Boulevard. But to the insiders, he was something else entirely, a gatekeeper to forbidden pleasure, a broker in human dreams, and the quiet man who kept the industry's most dangerous secrets. Bowers had been a Marine, a soldier who returned from war with nothing but discipline, charm, and a talent for reading people. He opened a small gas station in 1946, the kind of place where actors, producers, and rich men stopped on their way to somewhere better. Soon those stops became longer. A whispered offer here, a phone call there, and the station transformed into Hollywood's most discreet underworld exchange. He didn't just pump gas, he pumped access. He arranged introductions, midnight meetings, and auditions for young men and women desperate for a chance or for rent money. They were actors, waiters, dancers, newly discharged servicemen, the forgotten beautiful ones. Scotty knew them all, and he knew the buyers. In his later memoir, Full Service, 2012, he finally wrote what everyone had long suspected. Rock Hudson, Cary Grant, Spencer Tracy, they were all clients. I was just the middleman. They came to me because they had no choice. They needed roles, they needed rent, they needed to survive. He claimed to have arranged over 1,000 encounters across 3 decades, and to have taken part in more than a third of them himself. He described Hollywood as a machine of appetite, where everyone was both hunter and prey. A studio secretary once said, "When Scotty's phone rang after midnight, it wasn't about gasoline, it was about survival." His tiny gas station became a temple of sin hidden beneath the neon lights, its restroom stalls engraved with names no one dared repeat. Directors left tips in cashed, stuffed envelopes. Stars left in sunglasses long before sunrise. Police turned a blind eye, too many of them were on his list. For 30 years, Bowers kept his word. Never a tape, never a photograph, never a name leaked. He was the invisible thread stitching together Hollywood's most sacred lie, that purity sold pictures, while lust sold tickets. When he finally broke his silence in old age, the world gasped, not because they doubted him, but because it all fit too perfectly. His stories filled the cracks of history the studios had spent decades plastering over. The golden idols, it turned out, were all made of flesh. He died in 2019 at 96, quietly, with no lawsuits, no scandal, and no apologies. He left behind a box of names, hundreds of icons, who once lay down just to stand under Hollywood's lights. But Lancaster's final words about him read like a confession from the entire industry. He wasn't the devil, he was the mirror. And when Hollywood looked to him, it finally saw what it really was. When the lights went out and the cameras stopped rolling, Hollywood didn't fade to black, it simply went quiet. The stars we've spoken of, James Dean, Marlon Brando, Rock Hudson, Cary Grant, Montgomery Clift, and all the others, they built an empire out of illusion. They were beauty made flesh, desire sculpted into motion. But beneath that shine ran the same dark current: control, submission, and silence. Every smile you saw on a poster, every headline promising glamour, was written in invisible ink, the kind made from fear. These men weren't just actors, they were currency. They were bought, traded, and discarded in a system that valued obedience over soul. Their contracts were legal, but their real deals were made behind closed doors, where power had no witnesses. Some found strength in defiance, William Haynes, who refused to lie. Others were broken by the cost, Montgomery Clift, who drank himself into the grave, and Ramon Navarro, who was murdered for being honest about what he was. Each name, each legend, was one more brick in Hollywood's shimmering facade, a wall built from silence and secrets. But even now, if you listen closely to the reels of old film, you can hear it, a faint echo beneath the orchestra, the heartbeat of those who were never allowed to be real. Fame promised them immortality, but immortality in Hollywood is just another word for possession. The studios kept their images, their voices, their faces, and in exchange they took their truth. Burt Lancaster's final page in his secret diary reads, "The dream was never about movies. It was about control. We thought we were kings, but the crown was a collar, and the throne was a cage made of light." Now, decades later, their stories bleed through the silver screen. The laughter, the pain, the quiet surrender that shaped the world's idea of beauty. Hollywood buried its saints in gold, but the ground still trembles, and the ghosts of that golden age are still talking, in whispers, in films, in fragments, not asking for forgiveness, only for truth. Because every frame, every face, every lie ever sold was just another chapter in the same confession. Fame is never free.